Cash Flow Diary Podcast, episode 419.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cash Flow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you're here today because we are going to talk about the number one challenge. I'm just saying it's the number one challenge. I don't know if our guests think it's the number one challenge. I think it's the number one challenge. Having worked with a number of would-be entrepreneurs, existing entrepreneurs, and being one myself, I think this is the number one challenge, not just facing entrepreneurs, but dare I say the nation today. And maybe, just maybe, we might have some breakthroughs. Why? Because today's guest has been featured in places like Forbes. He's been featured CBS in the Morning, Fast Company. He's top 40, under 40 professors who inspire. We need more professors who inspire, by the way. Here's my point. He knows a lot about leadership. So much so, he's written the book about it, Under New Management, How Leading Organizations Are Upending Business as Usual. Now, here's the thing I want to say to you. I want to say to you that each one of you listening, I think you're a leader. You're a leader in the making. And I think today's guest is going to help that come out. So make sure that you're ready to take copious notes and pay attention to Dr. David Burkus. You there, sir?
I am here. Thank you so much. Hey, quick point. I don't know that I wrote the book on leadership, but I definitely wrote a book on leadership.
For some.
I don't want to overstate my credibility here.
But it's totally understood.
It's pretty good. I like it. It's a good book. But I don't know if it's the.
It's the book you wrote.
There you go. It's the book on leadership by David Burkus.
Yes.
Okay, that'll work.
That'll work. There it is. But I think it takes a special kind of person to write any book, let alone on such what could be easily a controversial topic. Now, this being the first time that you are here, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask a lot of people the first time they're here. Are you ready?
I am ready. Is that the question? Am I ready?
Nope.
Okay. All right.
It's coming right now. I tend to look at a lot of entrepreneurs like yesterday's superheroes. Entrepreneurs and superheroes, I think we have a ton of things in common. For example, occasionally we get dressed up. Maybe we don't put on tights, or maybe we do and wear a cape, and we envision ourselves going around saving our customers using our special skills and abilities. But also, like superheroes, entrepreneurs have a beginning. If you think about it, before the Hulk was the Hulk, he was just a kind of in the lab doing his own thing, as a doctor. Now, my point is this, though. Before being featured everywhere you've been featured, before becoming a leadership expert, before even being a professor that inspires, by the way, thank you for that. Who is David Burkus?
Well, I mean, in terms of priority, I'm a husband and a father first,
nice.
then kind of the writer. Funny in the origin story, the professor part is actually the accidental part.
So now you're like a movie, The Accidental Professor, really?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, yeah. So my story is, there's a lot of people that say like, oh, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up and I fell into this, et cetera. Truthfully, I think entrepreneurs aren't that way. I think they knew they wanted to be an entrepreneur. They just didn't know their business model yet, because they're always the kids that have the lemonade stands and are going to, like trade shows and trading cards during the weekends and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, that wasn't actually me. I did a lemonade stand once and it was a disaster.
Did you drink all the lemonade?
I did. I mean, basically, and then I underpriced it, right? Because it was like a quarter. I did not adequately price cute, right? I'm this like 7-year-old kid, and I was asking for like 25 cents, and I realized I could have asked $1 and people would have given it to me because I was a 7-year-old kid.
Exactly.
Anyway, when I was in my early teen years, I was kind of obsessed with the idea of being a writer. I had the John Steinbecks and Jack Kerouacs and Ernest Hemingways as sort of role models, right? And the English it might have been because English was the only subject in school that I even liked, but that was kind of what I set out to do. And so I went to university studying English, studying creative writing, and about right in the middle of my 4-year degree, I read books by people like Malcolm Gladwell and Daniel Pink, and I stumbled into something first that those people weren't starving. The interesting thing about Steinbeck and Hemingway and Kerouac is when you read the end of their lives, they tend to not be as good as times were when they were publishing famous books. So I knew I didn't want that, right? But you look at like your Gladwells and your Daniel Pinks and those type of people, and they're writing books that are widely circulated, are having an impact, and also have sort of a business model around it that's sustainable. And so that was the call to action, was like, this is what I want to do. Well, there's a problem with that. All of those people understand psychology and human behavior, and I don't. So that became the next step in the path, right? Clearly, I've got to do that. So I used up as many elective credit hours of my undergrad degree as I could, taking all of those courses. And then when I finished, I went on to grad school, and I'm banking on this idea that if I can understand social science and human behavior, then I can write about it, right? I can turn a decent phrase and I can tell it like a story. Then maybe I've got a good package to sort of put together and put out there into the market. And so that was the plan. At the time, though, my wife was going through medical school. She's now finished. She's the real Dr. Burkus. I'm the total fake one. My wife was going through medical school, so grad school was kind of easy to fit into the schedule for me too. We were newly married. We were childless. I had plenty of time on my hands because my wife was studying 90 hours a week, right? So I went to grad school, right. But I also had to provide food and all that sort of stuff. So
eat? That's good.
I know. That would probably add about 90 minutes onto my workday, which would be incredibly productive if I figured out how to do that.
I know, right?
Anyway, so I floated around a bunch of different jobs and worked in grad school full time while I was working full time, and about I want to say it was 2009 or so. Yeah, I think it was 2009. An interesting thing happened. So my wife is a physician. Her father is a professor. He's a professor actually at my alma mater. I took a class with him, actually. He gave me a B, and I never let him forget it.
Nice.
But he, because of that, knew that I was in grad school, knew that I was about to finish up a doctorate, mostly just as a desire to really dive deep into all of these things and come out the other end as someone who could speak to social science and human behavior in a way that leaders and practitioners could understand. And there was a retirement in the college of business. He floated my name to them. They called me to ask about adjunct teaching. Then that worked and went really well and was a ton of fun. And so they were like, do you want to stick around? And I was like, sure. So I really did default into the professor thing. It's the accidental. And it's funny. I'm absolutely terrible at career management. I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to do research wise and even how to run classes, other than I run them in if I were trying to learn this, what would I want to tell me?
Right.
And it works, but it's an interesting thing because it's sort of like, to use the superhero analogy, right? It is the Clark Kent, it is the Bruce Wayne, it is the kind of cover, the long story, the big call to action has always been doing what you and I are doing right now, which is uncovering deep concepts that are based in human behavior and social science and telling them in a way that can help leaders and managers and even just people who are miserable at work, and how to get less miserable at work and hopefully more productive because they're less miserable.
Less miserable. We'll start with that for sure. Now,
bar low, less miserable.
Yeah. Hey, why not? We got to start somewhere. Let's just first admit we're miserable, and now we're going to do our best to make it less. That's the goal. Now, I'm curious because you're one of the few people that I've interviewed who's mentioned Gladwell and Pink. I'm curious to know which of their, works resonate with you.
Oh, that's interesting. So from Gladwell, his most recent, or no, actually, I guess it's his third book. His most recent's David and Goliath now, right? But his third book was Outliers. That's probably the one that resonates the most with me. And one of the reasons was when I read his coverage of K. Anders Ericsson, who was the guy the theorist that came up with, what Gladwell would call the 10,000 hour rule. And he would really just described it as this sort of theory of deliberate practice, et cetera. I read Outliers and I was like, that doesn't sound entirely right. And so it influenced me to dive into that and how do people actually achieve peak performance through deliberate practice and all that sort of stuff. That said, he's a brilliant storyteller. I mean, it was the tipping point, which is what I read, that made me realize like there is a place for good writers outside of just literary fiction. And so that obviously had a huge impact on my life. I would say of all of those people, Pink and Daniel Pink's Drive is probably the biggest one. It's a wonderful, wonderful telling of Edward Deci and Richard Ryan's motivation theory, which is self-determination theory. And so because of that, it's a huge influence on me. Because it showed me that you can actually take high-level evidence-based concepts and present them in a way that people can really use. As I like to describe it now, you can take these ideas and put handles on them so people actually figure out how to like tools. I also should say Dan's probably got the business model that I emulate more as a writer, as a speaker, as all of that sort of stuff. So I look to him, and I'm not ashamed talking about this because I tell him this openly when we chat via email or phone or whatever. I look to him as like that's the business model that I'm emulating and building towards.
Well, this is interesting because I know for a number of people that are listening, they're trying to figure out how to carve out their ways to build organizations and, more importantly, create cash flow. What is the business model other than write a book and hopefully get it picked up by somebody? I mean, is that it?
So the business model of a writer. So, the best analogy I could give you that would probably resonate with everybody is the business model of a nonfiction writer, specifically a business book writer, is really similar actually to that of a recording artist. In other words,
that doesn't sound like we're starting off in a good spot right there.
No, follow me on this. And this is, I should say, a recording artist pre like Napster. But like, if you remember, I mean, the model was you do your work, you hope you get picked up by a label. The label pays you a little bit of money to go off and record the album, and then they take a ton of money off the album sales, and you make a little bit off the album sales. But you, as a recording artist, you make your money when you go plan and go on tour, right? And that's where it comes from. And so for a business book author, it's actually pretty similar. You're looking for a publisher who can help really improve the idea, but also get it the distribution you can't get alone. They're going to give you a little bit of money in business writing, or in the business of publishing, it's called an advance, but they're going to give you a little bit of money. And you go off and you write the book, you come back, you publish it together, and they take the majority of the revenue once it's published, but you get a little bit of a royalty, and you make your money when you go on tour, when you get invitations to go speak to companies or conferences, et cetera, about your idea. That's really where the majority of your cash flow comes from. So just like a recording artist, it's the merch, it's the tour, it's the ticket sales, it's that stuff that the majority of their revenue comes in if they're doing their business model right. The album is just a means to sort of lead to the rest of that. So business books are really similar. I mean, a book is a way to put an idea out there in the world, but it's the other ways the idea gets out there that really generate a lot of the cash flow.
Got it. And for those of you who are wondering, Napster was before iTunes. And before that, we had albums. They were physical devices you actually used to play music. I know. Look it up. It's there. Now,
I always thought they were just a con to make you buy like 12 songs when you really just wanted one, right? Isn't that why Napster existed? Why it was created?
You have no idea how many times I said to myself, I'm like, there's only 2 songs on this that I want. I'm just going to buy the singles. I did that all the time.
But see, even the weirdest thing is back in the day, even the singles had a bunch of songs you didn't want on them, right?
Exactly.
Remember B-sides, which were nothing but songs you didn't want?
It's so funny how, okay. See, right now, no one knows what we're talking about. You realize that?
I know, right? Because especially since it's a podcast, right? So these are people who are audio smartphone folks, right?
Totally. There's no B-side. What do you want to flip my phone over? How does that work? Anyway, here's what I've got to know. You could have, written about anything. And truth be told, English by far was one of my worst subjects. It's right up there with history, just like really straight snoozer. So the idea of doing what you do to me just sounds massive, like a whole lot of work. And how do you choose to go, I'm going to write and I'll do it in leadership. That'll do it.
Well, I mean, I suppose I could get all romantic writer and say that you don't choose the topic chooses you, or
let's not
something
do that.
like that. Right. I mean, there's some truth to that in the sense that like you should write about. Some people say you write what you know. I don't think that's true. You write what you're hugely interested in and what you're curious about. And really, I mean, the fun of writing a nonfiction book is actually in the researching. I know this because I'm currently in the midst of writing the third book, and I just finished the research phase and got into the writing phase. And the writing phase it's a slog. It's a ton of hard work. The research phase is awesome because you're just putting like a list of all the books and articles about this subject that you're fascinated with. You're putting that all together and reading through it. It's like, it's the perfect introvert's amusement park as a library, right? So it's like it's awesome. And the writing part is all that hard. But you start from what you're curious about. And in my case, I'm curious about really, at least on my podcast, we call it innovation and leadership, right? Or creativity and leadership. And I'm curious about both of those because I think there is a fountain of misconceptions about both of them. Then, when you look at the research on how both of them tend to operate based in psychology, et cetera, there are all sorts of misunderstandings about them. And so part of it is there's always new things to learn. Part of it is we're still learning a lot of new stuff. It's not leadership research, creativity research is not, physics where we're pretty sure we know how gravity works at this point. I mean, there are new discoveries in that, but they're not as groundbreaking as Einstein was. We got that covered like 50 or so years ago. In leadership and in human behavior, as we look inside into the self, we're still learning a whole lot about that, which means there's all sorts of new and sometimes strange discoveries going on there. And that's kind of what keeps me fascinated. And it's that fascination that keeps me through the work.
Got it. And you said sometimes strange. If you're studying humans, isn't it all the time strange? I'm just asking.
Yeah. Okay. So all the time strange. Sometimes it's prevalent and other times it's not. So sometimes we've seen it so much we don't think of it as strange. But you're right. It's probably all the time strange.
Now, when it comes down to leadership, though, you said there was a lot of misconceptions. So share. What are those?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest. So there's two really prominent ones, and they kind of go together. The first is, if you look through human history, there's this sort of misconception of the great man theory, right? The great man leader. We did this weird thing where we looked at great leaders throughout history and we tried to figure out what they all had in common. And, despite the fact that they were unfortunately, at least in Western civilization, usually tall, old white males, at that point, we didn't realize that was a bad question to ask and we should go back and reform a new question. We kept going and we found things about how they were charismatic and how they had high levels of intelligence and how they were well-spoken and well-educated and a lot of other things that really focused in on the leader. And for a long time, we forgot that leadership is a transaction. It's not a transaction, but it's a series of communication, which implies two parties, not just one. Right. In other words, there is no leadership unless there are people to talk to and to people to lead. Right. And so it was a number of decades before we actually started studying the interaction between leaders and followers. And when we did, that was first misconception. I think still a lot of people have that. Like if you ask someone to picture a leader, they a lot of times picture the same sort of cartoon character-esque figure. And then if you ask them who's someone who's been influential in your own life, in your own business, et cetera, it's a different picture, even though that would be the leader, right? Because we've got this sort of stereotype or archetype of a leader that's not based in reality. So that's kind of the first misconception. To me, the more dangerous one is when you look in a lot of leadership literature. So a lot of the people that are writing about leadership from a non-social science perspective will talk about, and I've come to sort of hate this phrase, but we'll talk about casting a vision, right? Oh, you've got to cast a vision of where you want to go and you've got to get buy-in, which essentially means you've got to get other people to see your vision. And when I look at whether it's corporate leaders or leaders of social movements, we don't actually see that. What we see is that leaders find a way to put to words and put to action what the community that they're leading already feels. In other words, one of my favorite examples of this is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who we look at in retrospect as this amazing orator standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial giving the I Have the Dream speech. What we forget is that he had to be coaxed into even helping the movement, right? So during the bus boycotts, they came and asked, can we meet in your church? And he said no. It took multiple days of being told, we don't have any other options. We need to use your facility. And then it took him actually attending the meetings, not as a leader, but as an attendee, to really see anything. And it was his talent in putting to words this vision of fighting against oppression, this vision of fighting against injustice that helped it. But it wasn't his vision. He didn't just start in a small little church house and cast a vision that got buy-in to a bigger group of people. He put to words a vision that was already in most people's mind about an injustice that needed to be corrected. And that's where a lot of good, solid leadership that lasts and makes an impact comes from, not from casting a vision, but from figuring out what the vision is and putting it to words and putting it to action.
Got it. Okay, so then let's talk to the entrepreneurs for a second, because oftentimes it feels like we came up with something no one's thinking about. How does that? How on earth do we do that? Because no one's thinking about my product today, you know. But
well, I mean, that's a really good point to an entrepreneur, right? No one buys your product because it makes you money. No one buys your product because of your vision. People buy your product when you find a way to tell them how this makes their life better or makes it easier or solves a problem that they have. In other words, you don't cast a vision and get buy-in for why someone should do business with you. What you do is you figure out what that person wants to get out of their life and their business, and you present the solution to it in the form of your product or service, right? So it works not just for leading individuals, but it works for leading people to the sale, leading people to whatever you need them to. Nobody does it for your reasons, no matter how eloquent you are. Nobody does it for the reasons you want to tell them. Right? They do it for what they want out of it. And you begin to be successful either as a leader, as an entrepreneur, heck, just as a salesperson, when you realize that it's much more about that other person and how you can help them than it is about how they need to do business with you just because you need a boat. You do
you do realize you just burst somebody's bubble because you just said it's not about you, dude.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to report that there's 7+ billion people in the world, and therefore, you have a 1 in 7 billion chance of the world being all about you.
Awesome. Well, that's okay. Some people will take those odds,
I know they're not bad odds, but I wouldn't put too much money on them. It might be a better idea to just start learning something about the other 6.99999 repeat billion people and figure out how you can serve them. And maybe, just maybe, you'll end up getting what you want by helping other people get what they want.
Okay. Now, you bring up this concept, though. You helping other people get what they want. So why is it so, I guess the best way to say it is, why does it feel like there are no leaders today? Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey. I know that if you've ever gone over to the site, CashFlowDiary.com, you may have asked yourself, where on earth do you get a domain name from? Especially as you are beginning to build your bigger, better, badder business, you need a web presence. You need the email address. You need a way for people to contact you electronically so that you can stop doing the @gmail.com game. Well, the good folks over at GoDaddy have definitely supplied us with every domain that we have ever used. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, because it's a quick way for you to get set up to capture your domain name the exact way that you want it. They got easy search functions, and most importantly for you is that you'll be up and running today. As I said, once you get started, stay started. Don't let small little obstacles of how to get your own domain name going stop you. So again, go to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, and let's get back to the rest of the story.
Well, I think it's because, truthfully, because it's a lot of people are either sending out that wrong message or are honestly not taking that time to listen and sort of understand it. There's no shortage of people attempting to be a leader. That's for sure, right? The challenge is there's fewer and fewer people influencing us, I think, because so many people are trying to cast a vision. They're trying to broadcast a message. You look at social media is a great example of this, right? Yeah, there are people with followers on social media, but I wouldn't call you a leader just because you can tweet it at 50,000 or 1 million people, etc. It just makes you somebody who can broadcast something. You become a leader when you find yourself, whether it's through social or through your local community, when you find yourself in the center of a community who's looking to you for guidance and are asking you, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that because they're convinced that you will actually be able to put their interests first and take them somewhere they want to go. So, I think a lot of technologies that we have now create a sort of me culture, and we broadcast us, or at least the sort of like perfectly curated version of our life with, safety and money and just the right amount of risk and adventure, that we broadcast out on Facebook and Insta Snap and whatever the newest technology is.
Did you say Insta Snap?
Yeah, it's a catch-all portmanteau for just social media flavor of the week, right?
You got it.
But all of it's the same. It's us broadcasting about us. It's the people that manage to communicate a message that they actually sort of hear you and care, that you are intrigued to follow. And yeah, those are getting fewer and fewer, I think, because it's easier and easier to talk about ourselves. And so we do. I mean, we are, after all, our favorite subject.
Well, hey, sleep is pretty high too. I'm just saying. But
that's my favorite activity, not necessarily my favorite subject.
Got it. Totally understood.
I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, right? So it's also an activity I don't get to enjoy nearly enough.
No, you don't need. Yeah, we should get together, and that's the new cause. We're gonna cast a vision around getting you some sleep.
But see, if I wanted to do that, it'd be more about how do we start a community that teaches parents how to get better sleep-life balance.
There it is. Now
I'm gonna coin that term, sleep-life balance. I like that.
Sleep-life balance. I know, right? You heard it here first, folks. Now, here's the thing, though. If there is so much noise, as you say, in the marketplace, that's what I'm calling it, noise, us talking about ourselves, it would almost seem easy if not odd, dare I say contrarian, what would happen if somebody actually didn't do that, but started talking about the things that you said it earlier about something that we were already feeling, something that they started putting to words what was already there. What do you think that would look like today?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways you can kind of already see it because it is easy to do, and the methods of communication we have make it easier to listen and easier to get that out. And that's part of the reason that we see a lot of social movements, especially. We see a lot of social movements spread much quicker now than they did with older communication technologies, et cetera. You see the same thing in business, right? I mean, it took John Rockefeller decades to build a $1 billion company. And granted, that was in, it wasn't in 2016 dollars. It actually would be way more than $1 billion, but you know what I mean?
Right? Don't get me started on that one, but yes.
To cross the 1 billion mark took a very long time. Right. And WhatsApp did it in like 18 months, right? YouTube, I know, did it in like 18 months because they got bought by Google for more than 1 billion. And part of that is just the ability to spread the word that here is something that solves your problem. Here is something that speaks to that need that you have. So whether it's, leading a movement or whether it's just getting people to adopt a product that really does solve a very real need, I think it's harder to pull away from the focus on ourselves that a lot of people have. But once you do, and you can actually create something that solves the needs that you saw out there in the community, you scale it a lot quicker now because of that. So it's a mixed blessing, but there is a blessing in there.
Well, okay, and this brings up a very interesting subject that tends to happen for a lot of our listeners. They see these things like you when you speak of social movements moving fast. It's we getting things distributed has been very democratized. It's really easy to get your message out there to whomever is willing to listen, but we still deal with the David, can I be a leader? Am I a leader? What do you think it takes for the common man, average person, average woman listening right now to feel confident to go, you know what? I am a leader. Let me make this happen.
Okay, so the first thing we've got to do is we've got to do a little bit of iconoclasm, whatever the
spell
whatever
it three
the
times
verb,
fast.
Whatever the verb version of iconoclast is. But we need to take that icon of the stereotypical leader that we all have in our mind and just smash that icon, because that's not helping us. When we feel like we're not actually acting as a leader, it's usually because we already have a couple people in our community that look to us, but we've got this grand vision of what a leader looks like, and we're not measuring up to that. So smash that vision to begin with. You are a leader when you begin to worry about the concerns of the people around you, when you begin to realize that they trust you, and you begin to act in a way that is respectful of that trust and that puts those people's interests first, right? So you become a leader when you have that realization. You might only have 2 people following you at that point, and you only have 2 people whose interests you really, really care about and who trust you to put their interests first, and who you can provide guidance on. Here's where we go from here in order to achieve our shared vision. But that's the moment when you became a leader. Now, you might have been hoping for hundreds of thousands of people to march on Washington with you, et cetera. And who knows, history may put that movement in front of you. But however many people you've been entrusted to the care of, you've been entrusted to lead, that still makes you a leader. And you should take it as seriously, whether it's 2 people or whether it's that million people.
Agreed. 100%. Would you say, though, because of, I'll say, technology, or what'd you call it? The Insta snaps and everything.
Yeah, Insta snap. Yeah.
That we have.
Facegram.
Yeah. Right. Insta snap and Facegram. Because we have all of these things, does this make it easier for us to be that leader or more difficult?
I think it makes it easier for us to get the word out. But the first thing we've got to do is fight the temptation to just not make it all about us when we're using those channels. Does that make sense? In other words, It makes it easier to find those communities and to speak to them. But the first thing you've got to do is recognize that there's more people on this thing than just you. And there's more that people want out of this thing than just to hear about you and what you had for breakfast and what kind of car you drive and all that kind of stuff.
Hey, you should have seen the waffle I had the other day. It was pretty good, though.
Well, I know, right? Or we honestly see the same thing. Instagram is probably the biggest in the entrepreneurship community, the biggest offenders. We see these people who will rent a Maserati for 2 hours and then take a bunch of shots wearing a bunch of different outfits. And then for the next 90 days, talk about how they're successful. And that's why you should follow them. And it's from a standpoint of a consumer, I'm going to buy the product that solves my need. And my need is not turn into the weird guy with the Maserati, right? My need is a little bit differently. But also from a leadership standpoint, I'm going to follow the person that cares about what I'm driving and whether or not I even have a reliable enough piece of transportation, not the person who's just Instagramming pictures of them super successful. That's not who we follow. We follow people who can prove they care about us.
Indeed. And I like that, by the way. I tried to fit in an Italian sports car. I was in a Lamborghini. It didn't work out for me, so I've given up on that.
I actually ran into the same thing. My 30th birthday, for the longest time, I loved the Nissan 350Z. It's just such a beautiful car and attainable, right?
Right.
I'm not gonna buy a car that costs the same as a house. I have a family to put in a house, so I need that. But what's funny is I went and test drove it on my 30th birthday with the intention of I'll let the guy talk to me about buying it, and maybe it'll be my birthday present to myself, whatever. And it was miserable because it was so tiny, right? I mean, it's a cool car, but the steering wheel was between my knees.
Yeah.
And that led to sort of a broader self-realization about it really doesn't matter what I use to get from one place to another. What matters is I get there safely and the audio system is good. Those are those 2 things are really the only thing that matter.
I agree with you, and it took me a little bit longer to get there. Now it is Uber, and I wear noise canceling headphones pretty much everywhere I go, so that the audio is good, and Uber gets me there. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'm happy with it. So here's the question: the title of your book is Under New Management, which suggests right there that there's something wrong with old management. And it says how leading organizations are upending business as usual. So A, what's wrong with old management? And B, what are the new people doing that is upending business as usual?
I mean, old management is great if you are running a fast food restaurant. And that's about it, right? And what I mean by that is old management it's an invention, right? First of all, it's difficult for a lot of people to think of management as an invention, but it has an inventor. His name is Frederick Taylor. And about 100 years ago, he was working with factories to try and get them more efficient. And at the time, factories were really just big buildings where individual craftsmen built whatever they needed, and occasionally they collaborated, right? And it was Frederick Taylor who figured out, no, what is the single best way to assemble whatever needs to be assembled in my factory? And he took a stopwatch to it. He timed for motions, all of this sort of stuff. And he's really the person. We say that like Henry Ford invented the assembly line. Well, Frederick Taylor really laid the theoretical foundation that let that happen, because he was the one that said there is one best way to do every step in the task of assembling something. And
Got it.
that works really, really well when people only need to do one specific thing, and when they have been trained on what that specific thing is, right? So fast forward to now, what's the modern day place where that still works? Ironically, it's not even the factory. There's a whole lot more automation, but also like problem solving that has to go on in a factory. It's really like, your local fast food restaurant that has the exact amount of time that the burger patty needs to be on the griddle and when it needs to, and those sort of steps. It's really the only place where it's sort of repetitive enough that you can train someone on every single situation they're gonna face, and then go about just managing, meaning enforcing that they uphold that exact standard, commit to those exact actions. Most of us work in an environment that is much more, Peter Drucker would have called it knowledge work, as opposed to the industrial work that Taylor was working for. Most of us have to solve problems, have to come up with creative solutions, have to invent new product ideas, right? Or resolve customer complaints. Most of us have to do stuff that requires a higher level of thinking. And we're finding that when we've known about this for decades, that the management model that Taylor invented really sort of breaks down. And what I'm trying to do in under management is point to the companies and the people and the ideas that are a better attempt at managing that type of work, because that's the type of work most of us are trying to do.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head for nearly every entrepreneur, and definitely every real estate entrepreneur listening, because I'm always asked, questions like, Jay, what do I say to get people to give me their money? And I'm like, there's not an assembly line of that to do you say this and then you wait 4.2 seconds, then say this. It
exactly.
Doesn't
Every piece of property comes with its own very unique problems that you may have never encountered before. And so there is no manual to consult. There's no guy with a stopwatch, and there's no manager making sure that you closed X number of deals that one day. Why? Because it's a much larger problem solving process, and you really can't manage it like it's a widget.
Well, okay. So then this usually right at that moment when I give them my version of that same answer, they go things like, well, how do I do it then? I can't do it if I don't know what's going to happen.
That's an interesting question. So, our job is really to point to what are the ideas or templates that are similar problems that we can dive into to help solve it, or our job is to kind of give a framework for sort of analyzing the problem and thinking about it, right? So, in your case, is there an exact script? And I mean, my mind goes back to like the Tom Hopkinses of the world who had scripted out closes and made tons of money giving people the confidence, right? In, you just need to say this thing and it'll work, right? And, the truth is that doesn't necessarily work. And I don't know that it ever really did, although it made Tom a lot of money. So more power to him. Really, closing a deal is solving a problem. And so if you can't figure out what to say to close the deal, it's probably because you haven't figured out what that person's problem is to begin with and how to offer them a solution, right? But if you can guide a client through that problem solving solution and present what you have to offer as the solution to it, they're probably going to ask you how much you want.
That sounds like leadership, David.
Yeah, isn't that weird how it all comes back to, that?
Well, I think it's interesting how we get stuck. Because I hear that, and I definitely hear this all the time. Jay, what do you say? What do you say? And I'm like, I think it's more about what you need to ask, not so much what you need to say. So are the businesses that are, out there that are upending business as usual, as you say, are they just asking more questions? Is that it? They're just surveying people? I mean, what are they doing?
So there's a bunch of different practices in the book that we look at. There's 13 actually. Lucky number 13. I don't know why that is actually. That's just what we came up with. And we started with a few more. We cut some, and then I didn't want to cut one just to get to a non-13 number, so we went with it.
Bakers it, so it's fine too.
Yeah, totally. So really the thing that all of the practices have in common, though, is this. They're all practices of elimination. In other words, They are practices where it's the leader is asking, what they're trying to figure out is, what are the things that are blocking my people from doing their best work? And then how can we eliminate or mitigate those things, right? And it takes a bunch of different forms, right? So the opening chapter actually deals with email, right? And is email the best system of communication for all of these needs? Well, it's not, exactly. And most people will tell you it's not helping them be more productive. It's helping them be more informed, for sure. It's a great communication tool, but it's a very interruptive one. I mean, you and I, before we even started recording, had to probably silence how many devices these days just to make sure we didn't get interrupted from something like an email, right? And so it's leaders that are saying, okay, well, let's reframe that. Either let's put limits on when we send it, or let's talk and come up with norms for what is an email, what is a phone call, what is a face-to-face conversation, what is a meeting, that type of thing, so that people can carve out more time to do the work that they need to do. And there's a bunch of other examples we can dive into, but they all start from that. They start from leaders asking and listening to, what is the thing that's blocking my people from doing their best work? And then how can we eliminate it or mitigate the effect that it's having?
Indeed. I can go days without looking at my email because it's just not going to help me. And unfortunately, people like my wife, she's like, I emailed you. I'm like, honey, that didn't work because I didn't get it. But so is it literally just eliminating extraneous communication? Are there also extraneous processes, extraneous thoughts that, cut off the edge of the loaf because that's just what we've always done? Is it literally that simple? Just do it the way we used to do it?
So sometimes that's the case, right? So, in another chapter, I look at what a lot of people in like the business press and media are talking about as unlimited vacation policies, right? And unlimited vacation policies are not actually unlimited vacation policies. What they are is a no vacation policy. Now, in other words, we had this thing, you earned a certain number of days over time. It caused a lot of frustrations because people weren't spending enough days and other people needed too many and there was no way to transfer, and you use them or lose them. And it was this giant headache and everybody felt nickel and dimed and watched. So we just eliminated it. And we said, when you need to take time off, take time off. You know your objectives for the quarter, for the year, for the whatever. And so we're going to hold you accountable to those. But we're not going to track when you're in the office versus when you're not in the office because, it's 2016. So let's just trust you, right? So that's what we looked at in the book, or process of elimination like that. Now, that said, the process of solving that problem, it's one thing to know that these things are blocking productivity, they're causing distrust, et cetera. It's the act of solving them that takes a lot more asking and listening, because you've got to have a conversation with the people that are affected about what's working, what's not working. And then you've got to go through a problem solving process to figure out how do we get the best of that. And to be honest with you, that looks different in every single organization. Why? Because every single organization is a different combination of people. There's 7 billion people on the planet. Most of them only work for one company, right? So every solution is going to look a little bit different. And that's why I say, like, the big thing to do is just focus on elimination. What's working, email might be fine for you, right? I actually don't get too many of them every day compared to a lot of other people. So I'm lucky. I also might have like a spam filter I don't know about, but regardless, that's not that big of an issue for me, but there are other ones, right?
Yeah, indeed.
So it's really about figuring out what it is for your specific people, your specific clients, and then eliminating those barriers.
Well, you bring this one up, and this is something that I don't know if I've leveraged it well or if we've done a good job with it, but it's worked to where, we're small, we only have a few people, etc. But I don't really care when you work, and they know that. And it's like, just get the job done. And it's worked out very, very well. However, it makes the hiring process almost impossible because it requires a person who's got really high pride in their work and sense of responsibility and gonna get it done no matter what. And it's like, okay, it's different. It requires something different on the front end. That's you can't exactly Google this at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you can't exactly Google it. I like that. I mean, in general, with hiring, one of the things that we looked at was in the book, the hiring process is definitely broken. This idea of like, let's just trust one or two people who talk to someone,
Right.
and they interview them, and then they make kind of a gut judgment about whether or not they work. Where a lot of places are having success, particularly if it's a more virtual team or geographically dispersed team, is with trials and other ways to sort of try the person out,
That's
right?
funny.
And so that, like, I looked at Automatic. They're the company that powers WordPress, which is, that's a quarter of the entire internet runs on WordPress, right? and they put someone on about a 6 to 8 week trial. They put them on a very real project, make them a team member, but it's contract work. And at the end of that, they're going to have a conversation with people that you interacted with, and you're going to have a final interview with Matt Mullenweg, the head of WordPress. And it's only after looking at how you've worked over this long period of time that we'll decide it. And, in other places we'll hire you, but you're not sort of crystallized until you found a team, and a team that actually votes to keep you. So this is like a Whole Foods market model. You're actually hired. The store manager makes the hiring decision. They put you on a team, like, let's say, like produce, right? You work in that department, and after about 30 days, that team votes on whether or not you're fitting in, right? And if you don't, then the store manager can either find a different team for you if it was like a cultural thing and it just didn't work out, or if you're a slacker, they can, I think the best euphemism I've ever heard is they can share you with their competition.
Yes, we think you would do better at Ralph's. Yeah, no,
right,
got
exactly.
it.
So this is one of those things where, again, it really depends on the organization and all that sort of thing, because there's some companies where you can't really do that type of work as contract work. There's some that you can. Even if you can't do a trial, though, the more people who are going to be interacting with that person that you can get involved in the process, generally the more informed of a decision that you're going to make. So trials and those sort of things would definitely work best. Second to that would be hiring as a team, getting the entire team that's going to interact with this person involved, instead of just trusting one or two of the senior people in the organization and make the decision and then being like, here you go, here's your new family member, right? So we're just going to throw you in there. So getting the entire group involved is a key element if you can't do something like a trial.
That's pretty funny. Okay, cool. Then we stumbled into something that worked, and without knowing it, because I just got out of my frustration of the process. I was just like, look, you're just going to be here for, 6, 8, 90 days. And hopefully you can sink or swim. If you swim, great, we'll keep you. If not, you'll be back out there. And if you can work under that condition for now, then just kind of go. So that is actually how we've gotten most of the people that are still here. So I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. And I mean, the most sort of, humane way to do it is usually say, like, here's a specific project. I'm bringing you in on this specific project, right? That project lasts a certain amount of time. And then when that's over, then you can say, like, either, hey, here's a new project, or, you can be like, do you want to be a full-time employee? A lot of times, like, the companies that'll do trials sometimes have to find that they've got to actually arrange for health insurance benefits and little stuff like that. That gets a little complicated. Like I said, every organization is different because it's full of different people. But generally, if you can do it on that contractor basis, you can find that. Now, the one downside is, and I'm sure you probably run into this, is you find an amazing person who works as an independent contractor. Sometimes you can't hire them afterwards because they don't want to be an employee, right? Some of the best employees don't want to be employees because they're such self-starters that they manage better on their own. Yep. In that case, you just got to sort of figure out, like, okay, well, what's the next project I can use to keep this person engaged because they're that good?
Yeah, I got two like that right now. And they've been here 6 years and 7 years, I believe now. So I've been.
But you keep finding new projects to put them on.
Yeah. So that is definitely the case. That is definitely the case. So now I know. Here's what I know. I know that a number of people have listened. Maybe they've laughed. Maybe they've cried. I don't know. But I know this. They want more of you. What's going to be the best way for them to track you down and get more of the information, or even pick up a copy of the book?
Yeah, so the absolute best kind of starting point is probably davidburkus.com. There's a ton of free resources there. I run a podcast called Radio Free Leader. I run it off of that site as well. There's also links to the book and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, by all means, if you've enjoyed this past time of banter, then you'd enjoy all of those resources too. So davidburkus.com. If we made you cry or if you hated this, then just stay on your podcast. me.
You're going to share them with their competition.
Right, exactly. But yeah, if you get anything out of it, by all means, davidburkus.com. And if you want to keep the conversation going, ask me questions, etc. I probably shouldn't have admitted that I don't get a ton of emails. So, if you've got one, I'll respond.
There it is. Now, as we wind down, I got a question for you, because here's what I also know about the people listening. There's someone listening who's considering, they're like, yeah, I want to do this entrepreneur thing. I want to be one of those leaders like David's talking about. I can do this. And let's pretend that they're standing in front of the superhero outfit store right now. They're like, ooh, what tights am I going to wear? Am I going to have a cape? And they're really considering making this their thing. However, in the back of their mind, they got that voice. And David, I know you know that voice. You have done battle with that voice. And every leader has to do battle with that voice. And for some people, they're related to the voice. And it's loud and can get in the way. My question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that they're actually going to do what you suggest they do to finally make this thing happen for them. And they're going to do it in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you tell them to do?
Honestly, I think we've kind of already talked about it, because it starts with that idea that you become a leader when you take responsibility for someone else's need. And one of the things that I love about most people in the superhero genre, right? Like my favorite superheroes are often, actually my favorite's Batman, so this doesn't apply, but most of them are the people who something weird happened, they got their power and they had to keep it hidden for a long period of time. And then they saw another person in need, and saving that person became more important than them hiding whatever strangeness that they had. Right. And so again, you become a leader when you experience the call that other people need you for something, and you give yourself to that thing that they need, just like most of the superheroes in the genre, Batman accepted, because he spent like decades planning and getting the cool suit and all that sort of stuff. You usually become a leader when you answer that call, just like most of these superheroes realized their full potential when they saw something in need, and suddenly the cost of staying hidden was too much to bear and they needed to help that person. So when you feel that call, that's when you're ready.
Nice. I absolutely love it. And I thank you for the work that you're doing, the books that you're writing, just the fact that you're inspiring. You might even be one of those professors, like if I had him, I might have actually stayed in that school thing, So that's pretty cool to know that people like you exist. And thank you for sharing your knowledge, insight, and wisdom here with us today at the CashFlow Diary.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean today? It means, davidburkus.com, because you heard something that you're like, man, I need to dig into that more. I need to become that person. And well, he's written a book to help you do those very things and make it happen. And today is the day. I like nothing more than knowing that during this episode, I'm willing to bet you experienced the call. Now it's your time to answer it. It's been fun talking to you guys today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.